Hello, welcome. We're going to start in about 6 minutes, y'all. I'm going to give people a couple of minutes after the 30 mark just to join, but I appreciate you all joining and thank you so much. I'd love to hear if you want to put in the chat any questions that maybe you want me to answer during this conversation or what you hope to gain out of this specific workshop today. All right, we'll get started in 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Welcome. We're going to get started in 4 minutes, giving people a few minutes after the 30 mark here to join, but we'll start promptly at the 33 mark. Cortana, that's a good question. I will definitely answer that question, and I'll probably start in the beginning answering that question. So I appreciate you bringing that to the table. But short answer to answer that directly, just very short answer is no, people are still getting hired without referrals. And I have lots of instances where I have seen that to be very true. Even personal story as close as my own husband, who was just in the job market, received 2 offers through 2 jobs he applied to that were not through referrals. So it really depends on role, industry. So there's some other variables, but I can get into more of the weeds around it. But people are still getting interviews without having referrals. I'm seeing that every single day. All right, so I'm going to kick us off in 2 minutes. We're at the 31 mark. Looks like some people are still joining, but feel free for everyone who is here to add any questions. Cortana already added a question, but if there's any other questions people have as it pertains to resume writing or just job search, job market trends, anything of that nature, I am happy to answer those questions towards the end of the session or wherever it makes sense in our session to include that. And I'll kick us off in 1 minute. Okay, I am kicking off in about 30 seconds here. 30 seconds. Okay. Thank you all for joining. All right, I am going to go ahead and get us started. We're at the 33 mark. So thank you all for being patient while I was allowing some other individuals to come through. But essentially what we are going to be talking about today specifically is going to be focused on resume writing. And I did a workshop a couple of weeks ago. And so if you have not had the chance to watch the recording of that workshop, or if you did not know that I was hosting that workshop, there is a recording and you can have access to that. Just let me know if you're interested. But that workshop was centered more around just the general structure and format of resume writing in terms of how to write a resume that stands out based on your personal experience. And this is more so around when we think about the job market right now and how things have shifted in the world of AI, writing a resume around using AI technology, because a lot of people are using AI for different reasons, whether it be in the workforce, in your job search. Companies are using AI, a lot of recruiting firms, a lot of companies in their recruiting and talent acquisition teams are using AI to streamline their workflow and screen job applicants. So when we think about the number of companies now that are using AI, and even as a job seeker, if you are using AI, how can you write a resume that is going to get you through those initial screens? Because that tends to be a big question that comes up, is that there's a lot of job applications that are submitted and you get that automatic rejection. I'm curious if anyone's willing to put into the chat if that has been your experience where you have received an automatic rejection. That tends to be because companies are using AI as part of their screening process. So we are going to talk about some strategies, and at the end of this, I will also leave you with a tool that I'll share after this call. I'll email it to anyone who attended the workshop. So I actually created a custom GPT specifically for writing resumes for career pivot. So I'm going to share that with all of you. It's one that I have personally trained over the last few years to help you in your search if you are trying to navigate the job search right now. But at the end of this, my hope is that you understand a few different things. It's going to be around how you can use AI effectively to write your own resumes, modify your resumes, how companies are using AI right now in the hiring process, because there's a lot of information out there. And then as you think about trends, just a few of the trends that we're seeing right now that are probably going to carry on here at least over the next couple of years, if not over the next 5+ years. So that really is the goal of today's conversation. And so before I jump in and introduce myself formally, I just want to make note, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to leave the questions in the chat here as we go along. And at the end, I will do my best to answer everyone's question or where I see fit in our conversation. So introducing myself really fast, I just always like to jump in with that. Most of you know me, but some of you don't. So I like to introduce where my credentials are coming from and why I am qualified to speak on this topic. So I am an ex-recruiter. I recruited at Indeed and at Google at a global scale. So I have worked and operated out of a lot of different hiring systems. I also have hired for a lot of different role profiles. I am now a certified professional career coach and a certified professional resume writer. I do partners with organizations as well, and I am an advisor for Glassdoor. So I actually give career advice on their platform. So this is essentially the experience that I'm bringing to the table, and I'm really, really passionate about helping people understand what is going on in the job market, and not what just is going on, but how you can actually empower yourselves to stand out in a market that is changing so quickly. And so with that being said, a few things that we're going to cover today. So I ran through this high level a moment ago, but here's essentially the agenda. I want to just give you the rundown of the hiring landscape in an AI-driven world, inside applicant tracking systems, so helping you understand what does the applicant tracking system actually do, the importance of job descriptions, because we need to understand why it's important to utilize job descriptions as we think about writing our resumes. High level, I want to show you just like what does the application process look like, and it's going to vary depending on organization, but giving you a high level visual view. Then companies that are using ATS, because one of the questions I get a lot is, well, I hear from some people they review their applications manually, and then I hear from other people that AI ATS is rejecting my application. So we're going to talk about that. Then prompt engineering. So I'm going to give you some frameworks that you can actually use that should help you in your own resume writing. High level talk about metrics and why that is important to include in your resume, and then just give you a few trends. And then the goal will be to have Q&A for those who have questions. So that is what we're going to cover today. Now going into the AI-driven landscape. So AI has been around for years, but it has been amplified over the past probably 2.5, almost 3 years now, ever since ChatGPT rolled out back in Q3, so end of year, November-ish of 2022. What we are seeing now is that once AI in terms of ChatGPT rolled out, all of this snowball to where now everything is about AI. So we're hearing this come up in all sorts of conversations across all industries. I just did a workshop a few weeks back around the future of hiring, the future of the job market. AI is integrated in 100% of industries. So there is not a single industry that is not using AI. And that's important to know because it explains a lot around why we're seeing so many changes, especially when it comes to the hiring landscape. But few things I just like to call out here, a few just data points that I think are important for you to know. So in 2024 alone, it was reported that 98.4% of Fortune 500 companies are using ATS systems to parse resumes. So that's important to know because when you're submitting your application and you are submitting it into Workday or to iCIMS or to Lever or any other applicant tracking system, it is important to recognize and understand how a company may be using technology and which companies may be using AI to screen for your application as you submit it. So you can anticipate in this case that nearly 100% of Fortune 500 companies are using ATS systems. So that means when your application is submitted, it is going through a filter process, a screening process based on the criteria, based on the customizations that the company has opted into based on the technology that they're using. So if the company is using Workday, which is one of the most widely recognized applicant tracking systems, companies can customize how much AI, so how much filtering, how much of the technology is used in their hiring process, in the technology that's used to screen applications. So a lot of these companies are starting to use more and more technology to screen people that are applying because they are getting so many applications. And on average right now, we're seeing about 250 applications per job role. And plus or minus, depending if it's a really hard to fill, like really niche skill set, you may see less applicants, but on average, it's 250 applications. So when we think about that, and then we think about the layer where a lot more people now are using AI, whether it be ChatGPT, or if you're using Gemini, some people use Claude, and there's other technologies out there to write your resume. What this also means is that the technology is getting smarter. So we have to use our knowledge base to really think about how we're going to use AI when we already know that it's being used a lot more than it has been in the past, and that companies are using AI essentially both to screen in and screen out applicants. So that's the first data point there. Then we also have applicant tracking systems, and I'll get more into this in a few moments here, but the few examples that I pull out here are iCIMS, Greenhouse, Taleo, that are assigning a numeric relevance score. So some systems are screening applicants, and if you're not scoring within a certain percentage, whether that be the top 10 or 20%, for example, then your resume gets screened out, or you are fall into the black hole, which is what in recruiting we call the black hole, is where your application is just sitting in a pile essentially of applications where the recruiter doesn't actually get to that application. So some of you may have experienced where you've submitted an application and you haven't heard anything back, or you hear something back several months later and you're wondering, well, why am I just now hearing back? It's probably because they're just getting around to actually closing out the applications, although the role has been filled for some time. So those are just a couple of examples of, excuse me, how applicant tracking systems are being used. But then we also have companies that like iCIMS that and Workday, where they have actual analytics and talent insights, which means that recruiters can actually filter and sort and track candidates based on their score and status. So the capability, the functionality has really amplified because of how AI has snowballed and how quickly it has gained momentum in the last few years. And so Cortana asked a question before we started this conversation, asking about what she's hearing on her end is that in the current job market, the trend is that no matter how good your resume is, the only way to get through and into an interview is through referrals. And so she wanted to get my opinion on that. And so my opinion on that is this. Yes, in some instances, you're going to see that be the case. So if you're applying for, say, big tech, for example, the Googles, the Microsofts, the Netflix, looking at Microsoft, those organizations, they tend to naturally, historically hire more based on referral. How do I know? Because I worked in big tech. And that's where I can give you that data. And I have a lot of friends that work in big tech as well. But I have very much on the other side have seen people that maybe if you're looking at a mid-sized organization or a smaller organization in tech, for example, where people are submitting their applications through a company's applicant tracking system and they're getting interviews. So that for me, and I see this on a daily basis, is a signal that you have to just understand where, number one, you're applying to. So if you're applying to a landscape that is more competitive, so companies that are more competitive, you can anticipate that you're probably going to see more of this referral-based type of process. But if you are open to looking at companies that may be startups or might be small, mid-sized organizations, where you know you have the experience that to bring to the table, you can very well get through and get past the applicant tracking system into the interview process through submitting your application. A lot of it has to do with just understanding how the applicant tracking system works so you can tailor your resume effectively. Some of it is timing. So some of it is if you're applying to roles, and because we know that within the first, and I should not say we, I will tell you that within the first 24 to 48 hours is where you're going to see the highest volume of applications. Typically, if a recruiter is hiring for a role and it is a what is called a P0, which means a business critical role, they're going to start screening and going through applications right away. So it could very well be timing. So if you are applying for a role and it's been open for a week, but they have already started screening applications because the role was opened a week ago and they're trying to hire quickly for the role, it may have nothing to do with you not being qualified or being qualified or unqualified. It's just a matter of timing. So you just have to be aware that timing does play a factor in the hiring process. But we're going to talk more on the side of understanding the applicant tracking system and then giving you, like I said, some of those strategies for using AI to tailor your resume. Any questions before I continue forward? No? Okay, perfect. So let's talk about inside ATS, what I like to call ATS 2.0. And I call it ATS 2.0 because of the fact that applicant tracking systems have been in existence for a long time. It's just now with the evolution of artificial intelligence, we're seeing that there's a lot more capabilities. So some of the things that you will want to be out on the lookout for when we think about an applicant tracking system. And these are things that you will not know from the outside looking in unless you're someone who's on the side of the hiring, but it's just good to understand, because if you are not getting through into interviews, or if, say, you're applying into a certain database, an applicant tracking system, it's just good to be aware of how some of these systems are screening. So a few of the things that tend to come up when we think about artificial intelligence and how AI is being used within an ATS is the ATS is going to screen and read your resume. So a lot of times when you look at companies like Workday, and I use Workday as the example because that's one of the most widely recognized ATS systems. When you apply for the role, I don't know how many times this has happened to you, but it's happened to me where I submit my application and it parses my resume and pulls in my information into the job application, and basically it's all screwed up. That is the parsing functionality that these applicant tracking systems have. That part of it in the job application is not going to impact the resume on the back end. But what you do want to do with your job applications is when you do see that that information is not getting parsed over correctly, you do want to take the time and you do want to fill out that information, even though sometimes it can feel like a chore and it's redundant. You do want to make sure that that information is accurate, because the job application side is one element of the application process. But then once you submit your job application, the resume is what the recruiter is going to pull. And on the back end, when they pull the resume, they are going to see that the resume is fully intact. I recommend submitting it via PDF. That is my recommendation because it preserves the format. But the goal with having you submit your resume via PDF is to have it preserve formatting, but you still want to make sure that the application is actually correct, because sometimes on those applications you will get rejected if the information is not filled out correctly. So there's two parts to that. So I just want to make sure that you guys are aware of that. But part of that is just that the parsing feature on a lot of these applicant tracking systems is not great. So it just tends to mismatch the information. So you just have to go double check the application, but rest assured that on the back end, your resume is okay, as long as you're submitting it via PDF. Now, it also has the capability of comparing your experience, so matching your skills to the job description. So when you have, and may have or have not heard of this, but in a lot of instances, you may have heard where people will say you need to tailor your resume to every single job role that you're applying to, or you need to make sure that your resume matches the skills in the job description. There is some truth in terms of matching skills to job descriptions. There is a way that I would tell people to approach that, which is I typically tell people you want to try and stick within similar type of role profiles, because you see trends across job descriptions if you're applying to the same type of jobs versus trying to apply for a bunch of different type of job roles. It's hard to tailor your resume that way. But if you are tailoring your resume and you're paying attention to the skills, and I have an example that I'll show you in terms of a job description that has the skills highlighted, but if you are doing that, then you are going to have a higher probability of getting through an applicant tracking system. And there's a few ways that this can look. One way can be you can have a dedicated skills section, which we'll get into a little bit more about. But the other ways you can have some of those keywords and skills kind of sprinkled into your bullet points as well. So if you are using a certain technology, we'll say Salesforce, for example, you can have that in your skills section, but you can also have a bullet point that talks about how you use Salesforce to streamline your workflow, and then ultimately that ended up being X, whatever the result was. So you do want to make sure you're paying attention to what they're asking for in job descriptions, because the applicant tracking system can match your skills based on what you actually have in your resume to the job description. And if it is not matching up, then that can be where your resume either gets deprioritized and moved down in ranking, or in some instances, it can be that your resume gets rejected. So that's where I just like to share that information, because that tends to be a question that comes up a lot. And then there's a scoring system in some where, from a 0 to 100 scale, you will see that, not you, but the recruiter can see how strong of a match your score is. So for example, when I worked at Indeed in recruiting, I would actually only receive resumes that were ranked and categorized as a high probability, and they would give me a score based on that person's job application and their resume. So I knew these were the ones that were being prioritized in the system. And so I got to decide, though, in my specific case, which resumes I looked at first. But as a recruiter, and I will tell you this transparently, when I was in recruiting, that very much like if I have 400 other applications, which in a lot of cases I did, then I was prioritizing the ones that were ranked higher. And that just is a fact, because when we think about bandwidth and when we think about recruiters, and a lot of times they get a bad rap for, I will say there's some shitty recruiters out there, excuse my French, but there are some that, in genuinely speaking, it's just a matter of bandwidth. Like when you're hiring for multiple different roles and say you have 400 applications for across 12 different job roles that you're hiring for, that's where you tend to leverage technology more. So that was something that I can tell you from my own experience was very true. And a lot of systems still use that, where they have a scoring model where they'll rank and prioritize job applications, which resumes specifically, based on score. And then those would get pulled up to the top for the recruiter to review. And then, as I was stating before, that in some instances that you'll see in some applicant tracking systems where some of the lower scores will actually get filtered out. So that means a recruiter doesn't actually ever see that resume. And it's, again, not that you don't have the experience, but it's just because technology now is being so heavily utilized. And it's frustrating when you're on the other side of it and you're like, well, I have the qualifications, I have the experience, like I don't understand why I'm not getting through. It's most likely because when you think about the job application, your resume was not prioritized, and it's not necessarily that it was your resume is weak, for example, or you don't have the right information. It could just be that there's a lot of talent in the market where a lot of those resumes are getting pulled up and they just didn't get to your resume. So you just have to pay attention to the feedback that you're getting. So I typically will tell people, if you're getting rejected for every role that you're applying to, that means you need to look at your resume. If your resume is going into what I call the black hole, meaning that you're not getting yes or no, that means that you are clearly being considered for opportunities, but there's something probably not in certain roles you're applying to that's not ranking you high enough to where you're getting pulled and prioritized for review. And some of it is just going to be timing. And those are the kind of the three categories and buckets that I like to share. But if you're falling right now into the category of like, I am getting rejected for all of these roles that I'm applying to, that is going to tell me we need to look at your resume, because you should at least be getting into some interviews, or at least getting into the review process, where when you're not hearing back, it's because you're most likely being considered. So that's where we want to at least get you to, with the goal of getting you into interviews. And then we have now some new technologies that are coming out as well. And so there's newer AI technologies, ATS systems that are being created that actually function kind of like a ChatGPT, where they will actually summarize the person's profile in like 1 to 2 lines and basically say, hey, here are your top resumes. These are the ones you need to look at, and here is why. And that's how some companies now are making their hiring decision. It's just based on the actual ATS, the AI technology screening, pulling those resumes and saying, here's your short list of candidates that you need to look at. And so ultimately, at the end of all this, though, is that your resume does get pulled into a database. And so when you're applying to roles, your information is stored on file. And so part of when you apply for roles, especially if, say, you're applying to like larger companies, I would say anything that would be like maybe 1,000+ employees, you can most likely anticipate that they're going to keep your application on file. And when you're applying to future roles, they typically have visibility to see what roles you have applied to in the past. So if you're applying to companies and you maybe didn't get through the initial screening process and you've gotten rejected out of a role you applied to, you just want to be cautious of like what roles you are applying to, because of the fact that a lot of companies now can actually see historical data around what you have applied to in the past. And as long as I tell people, as long as you're applying to roles that are similar in scope, like maybe you're applying to a customer success manager role, and then you see a client success manager role, and then you see an account manager role, those have some similar overlapping responsibilities, then that's okay, because at least it's falling into the same category and same family. But some people will apply to roles and just apply to anything that comes up in the company. And that's where some people can actually find themselves in situations where, I don't want to say blacklisted, but maybe you're not being given the opportunity for consideration because you've applied to so many different roles that they just don't know what you're actually looking for. So just be cautious of that. It would be my advice there. Any questions before I move on? No? Okay. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go into the job description real quick. So we kind of already touched upon this in the previous slide, but I'm really big on reading the job description. And when I say read the job description, you can actually use AI, and I actually have a prompt that I'll share with you a little bit later on. But you can pull in the job description prompt into, say, ChatGPT. I tend to guide people, and I say ChatGPT is probably going to be, in my personal opinion, the best tool for writing a resume, but there are other tools out there, but you have to know how to prompt it to give you the output that you need. So you can pull in a job description because you want to pay attention to the keywords, and I'll show you an example of this in a moment. And then you also want to pay attention to not just the minimum qualifications, but you actually want to review the whole job application, because a lot of the actual content that is part of the screening process, yes, one part is coming from the minimum qualifications, but they actually, like the keywords and the skills, a lot of that actually comes from the meat of the actual job description. So when we look at the job description, and I pulled just a random marketing director role here for you to see, I typically tell people you want to pull this all in. So everything from job summary down to qualifications, you want to pull that in as part of your prompt if you're prompting it using AI, or if you are looking at a job description by hand and trying to determine what you need to include, you want to look at the whole job description, because a lot of the actual core elements of the information for keywords, skills, and then the actual responsibilities that you need to show examples of in your resume are going to be in that key responsibility section. So there are tools out there too that you can use that actually highlight the keywords in job descriptions. So as you can see in mine, it's you can see that there's a lot of them that are red. So I like to use a tool called F1 Hire, and this is where it's highlighting all of the keywords that are coming up in the job description. But then there are also some other ones too that you can use as well. And so I will share, some of those after this call, but this one specifically for this purpose is going to be F1 Hire is what I use specifically to essentially, it's an extension that you can use, and it'll tell you like what are the keywords that are coming up. But you can also pull this into ChatGPT, and it'll help you to be able to make sure that you have the relevant content from the job description in your resume based on your actual experience. All right, so I shared this actually in our last workshop, but I like to give this visual because I'm a very visual person. So just a high level overview before we kind of go more into the prompting of prompt engineering side of things. I do like to show what it typically looks like when we think about job application to actual person getting hired. So companies are going to post their job roles. They are posted on their company site, and a lot of times they're also published publicly on other job boards like Glassdoor, Dice, ZipRecruiter, when we think about LinkedIn, Indeed, those job boards as well. So when you are on LinkedIn, or if you have been on LinkedIn before, and then you click apply and it takes you to the company's job board, the source is the company's job board, but a lot of times they're scraped over to these other third-party job boards, or companies will actually post them live on these other job boards. So it happens in two ways. But basically, once the jobs are published, people apply for roles. That's where then these resumes are getting parsed. So they get parsed, and there's different applicant tracking systems. So we talked about a few examples of how the applicant tracking system is actually being utilized depending on which platform you're applying into, and what customizations the company actually has built into their technology. But essentially, in some way, shape, or form, it is going to be parsed. It's going to be looking for keywords, titles, dates, education, and essentially qualifying the candidate. So either it's a probable match or some person is not qualified. The one kind of caveat to this in terms of job application before it actually goes into an ATS is that in your initial job application that you answer and fill out your information, there might be some knockout questions. And what knockout questions are is in the actual application, companies might ask you for years of experience, like do you have 7 years of experience in project management, or do you hold a bachelor's degree, or do you have a PMP certification? And some of those questions that come up are actually considered to be knockout questions. And that means that if you don't answer the question in the way that they're looking for, so if the job role is asking for 7 years of experience, and then you answer the question, no, I have 7 years of experience, your application is getting rejected. It's not getting looked at because you answered the question no. So you have to be careful about how you're answering those questions, down to the actual salary question. And that one can be kind of a conundrum, because when you think about the salary, you don't want to lowball yourself. But for a lot of companies now, what they're doing is in the application, when you're submitting your salary, if the salary is outside of the salary bracket, that will automatically reject an application in a lot of instances, because they're trying to keep individuals within a certain salary bracket. And so they will use that question in the job application to filter people. So typically what I will tell people in terms of how to go about answering that, because that one can be tricky, I typically will tell people that I would go for the higher end of the salary, not necessarily the max salary range, but I would aim for the higher end. And then normally throughout the interview process, what happens is that you're going to get confirmation from the recruiter to reconfirm your salary requirements. So if they're asking you to reconfirm your salary requirements, you tell them my salary requirements fall within the range of what the company's offering. So you don't want to, put yourself and box yourself into a number. But then once it gets to the offer stage, then that becomes where you negotiate and say, look, based on my understanding of the role and now understanding what the company's asking for, this is actually what I'm looking for. And so then you can negotiate that salary. But initially, if it's a role that you're really excited about, if you see that salary question come up, you do want to be careful about how you answer that. So I just want to give you that tip so you know. But I got sidetracked. I want to bring us back here to the actual application. So once you get to the application phase and you submit your application, your data is going to be stored either way, whether you move forward or not. But essentially, once the application and the data is stored, if you're moving forward in the process, some companies do give assessments, some don't. Some will go straight to interview scheduling, and then ultimately leading to the person being hired. So that's kind of the high level overview of how the job application / ATS view works. But again, that last part of the process with the assessment interview part, like that's going to vary depending on the organization. Any questions? Nope. Okay. All right, I'll keep us moving. So I talked about this earlier when we first kicked off the conversation. One of the big questions that I get is, why is there conflicting information about companies that use an applicant tracking system and automatic rejections versus manual reviews? So there are going to be some people that say, hey, I review every single application that is submitted into my organization, and that is true. There are going to be people that say, hey, applicant tracking systems do reject applications automatically. That is something that is baked into our technology, and that is true as well. So typically what I tell people is that people are going to share based on their personal experience. I will say I personally have worked in applicant tracking systems where I manually had to review, but I've also been on the other side of it, like I shared earlier, where it ranked and categorized resumes that I received or auto-rejected resumes as well. So I've seen both sides of it. But what I do say in terms of kind of like general rule of thumb when we think about using ATS, so we talked about Fortune 500 companies, larger enterprises, so 500 plus employees, you tend to see where they're using more AI in their actual hiring process. LinkedIn and Indeed postings, and what I mean with that is that I don't know if you've ever seen like LinkedIn Easy Apply, for example. LinkedIn actually on the Easy Apply side has their own like applicant kind of tracking system baked in, where somebody who's posting a job similar to Indeed, where you can actually set the criteria for application review. So if somebody doesn't answer questions a certain way, or if the AI doesn't see the information in terms of dates for years of experience or job titles, the AI in their technology can actually reject applications. And on LinkedIn, I know it's 3 days, you'll get an automatic rejection. I can't remember what it is on Indeed, but they do have their own kind of applicant tracking type systems built in that uses artificial intelligence to screen, and companies can use that feature when they're posting jobs. So you just want to be kind of on the lookout for that. And then government healthcare organizations, you'll tend to see are using some sort of applicant tracking system, and a lot of them are using like Workday, Taleo, iCIMS. Those tend to be like the more widely used ones, but of course there's other ones out there as well. But more on the manual review side is going to be smaller businesses. You tend to see more manual review. Not to say that's in all cases, but this is just more likely to see this. Startups, so you'll tend to see those be on the startup side is going to be like if they have people that are going to be referred in. So in the startup world, a lot of times you'll tend to see that happen where they're manually reviewing resumes, or maybe they're getting referrals in. Freelance contract gigs as well, you're going to see more manual review. Nonprofits, and then because a lot of them are running on leaner teams, so you would think that they would have technology, but a lot of it is around funding and stuff too. And then if you're subscribed to any like email, Slack channels, niche job boards, then typically, of course, that's going to be a manual review as well in most cases. Now going into what's in our control. So I want to focus on shifting gears into how you now that you understand hopefully a little bit more around the actual screening process with ATS, how different systems work, what to be out on the lookout for. How can you actually start to think about using technology to revamp your own resume? So a few things that I do always tell people that you want to be on the lookout for is like clean formatting. So I typically recommend just a single column resume, and you want to try to avoid tables, images, graphs, just because that can mess with the applicant tracking system. You can have a resume that is more I don't want to say fancy, but more detailed if you want to, but I would say use that as more of a networking resume where you actually hand that to somebody if it does have graphs on it, or if you have an image that you want to include, that would be where I would use that as a networking resume. You do want to make sure you have clear job titles and dates. You do want to pull keywords from the job posting. That's going to be an important factor. And then metrics. And this is going to be not so much on the applicant tracking system side, but it is going to very much be that once you actually get into the initial screen with, say, a recruiter, an HR representative, and in some cases, if it's a smaller organization, it might be the hiring manager, the metrics for you is going to help you stand out, because if you're not showcasing results and you're just talking about what you do, that isn't going to set you apart from, the 100 other applications or 200 applications. So you want to make sure that you are really dialing into your experience and showing your impact. And I have a prompt for that you can use. So the anatomy of a strong resume. So I just want to give you a high level review. And again, if you want more details around this, I do have a workshop that I did a couple weeks ago where I dived more into this around the actual anatomy of resume writing and the why. But just for the sake of our conversation, this is the general kind of format. You always want to have contact info. If you don't have a phone number, if you don't have your email, city and state is a big one, or city and country. A lot of companies do look and hire based on location, even if it's a remote role. In some instances, like they still want to make sure that you're in a certain location. And my husband actually just ran into this. He got an offer for a company, supposedly remote, and then all of a sudden it became, well, yes, it's remote, but we need you to actually reside in a certain location. So they were trying to get him to relocate. So it was not actually, remote. So you just want to make sure that you're clearly showing your location or where you're willing to relocate to if you're trying to relocate. And then if you have a LinkedIn profile or a portfolio, it could be good to put that up on top. You also want to have, I personally recommend a professional summary, or what I call a Reels highlight. So that's like 3 to 4 sentences or 3 to 4 bullet points where you're just high level, years of experience, who I am, what's my role, and what are some of the key areas that I have supported. And that typically ties into some of the core competencies or skills that are going to be found in jobs that you're looking at. And that's where you can put that into that initial view section, because you have to think that once it does get into the hands of a recruiter, they have a very limited attention span. And a lot of times they're spending 6 to 10 seconds max on the initial skim before they're deciding if they're going to click down and look at your resume more. But for the sake of also on the applicant tracking system side, it's also good because then you can include some of those keywords in there, because that will help, to kind of strengthen your resume when you think about job description versus keyword matching. So that could be a good space for you to include some of that information there as well. Then having a skills or core competencies section, I do recommend having industry skills and technical skills. Industry skills are going to be things like, in this resume example, this person is an HR manager, so it's going to be things like onboarding and offboarding. It's going to be things like career path, performance discussions or documentation, retention programs. Those are all examples of industry skills. So these are skills that are directly tied to the job function that you see come up in a lot of the actual job descriptions that you are applying to. You're going to see a theme across industry skills that they're asking for, but you're also going to see a theme across technical skills that they're asking for. So technical skills in this case are going to be HRS platforms, Microsoft Office. So a lot of the job roles this person was applying to, they were calling for Microsoft Office, and they listed out Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint, SharePoint. So we included that because we saw that come up in a bunch of job descriptions, because that could be the thing that screens you out if you don't have that information in there. LinkedIn Recruiter, that's a tool. So those are things that you want to have in the skills section. But you can also weave some of that into your bullet points if you prefer as well. So you might have a bullet point about, in this case, how this person used LinkedIn Recruiter as part of their recruiting process. So that could be in a bullet point versus in the skills. It's your choice, but you just want to make sure the skills, industry, and technical that you're seeing come up in job descriptions, those are in your resume. And using AI, so again, I'll give you the prompt here in a moment, that will help you to make sure that that information is in the resume. But outside of that, a few other things here is going to be the work experience. So you always want to have the company, job title, month and year, and then you want to have I like to have scope of role. It's not mandatory. I like to have it. I like to give a balance of like, hey, here's high level what I'm doing. So just the general gist of my role. And then I like to have some of the impact focused bullet points. Because then that tells the story of like, yes, this is a quick snapshot of what my day-to-day looks like, but let me also show you some of the key metrics, deliverables, and the impact that I have had. And then finally, education. For some people, if you don't have your degree, I typically tell people it's a good place then put any certifications that you have, or professional development trainings that you have gained. That could be a good substitute. And you can list that under education too if you're wanting to move away from the focus on the degree component, but that doesn't take away from the experience, because at the end of the day, if you have the experience, then that should triumph, and the goal should be you should get into the interview process. And then there's a few other optional sections, so certifications, awards, projects, volunteer, and there's some other ones that you can use, but those tend to be some of the core ones that you'll see come up in resumes. So that's the general anatomy. So when we think about using prompt engineering for resumes, I typically like to explain to people just high level that prompt engineering for anyone who's trying to use, say, ChatGPT or any other AI tool where you have to feed it information, the output is only going to be as good as what you put into it. So it's really important to write clear, specific instructions, because that's going to be how you're going to get better answers from AI tools like ChatGPT, whether it be related to resume writing or anything else you're trying to do using those technology. But you do want to treat it, and like I have here, it's like your GPS direction. So the better you explain where you want to go, then that means the more accurately it's going to take you there. And so I have just a high level example of like a weak prompt would be, hey, write me a resume but a strong one would be, hey, write me a resume, a 2-page resume for a project manager that has 10 years of experience in tech, highlighting leadership, cost savings, and international team management. That's a strong prompt because you're telling ChatGPT exactly what you're looking for them, or not them, the technology to highlight, and it's going to give you a better output, but then you're still going to have to fine tune from there. So I have a few other examples here. So I typically like to break it into what I call 4-part formula, where you want to focus on the role, the goal, the context, and the format. And this format here, this general kind of guidance that I have as an example prompt, like you could use something like your resume writing expert, rewrite this bullet point, and then just know that you guys will get this information. It'll be available for view afterwards. So if you don't capture all of the data, I just want to call out, like, you'll still have access to it, along with the slides that will be in the community as well. And the community is free to join if you're not in the community. Going back to this prompt, so then you can tell it to rewrite your resume bullet points. So maybe you only want to use it for certain bullet points. So you want to rewrite the resume bullet points for a product manager role. So maybe you're trying to do a career pivot and you are in engineering, software engineer, but you're trying to pivot into a product manager role. So you want to tell it that you're trying to write these bullet points specifically for product managers so they know how to tailor the information. And again, I keep saying they, but I mean the technology. And that's where you want to focus on building some strong prompts around that. And it's going to really show in how you write those prompts, the output that you get. So I have here how I personally like to think about bullet points. And then I have a really strong kind of walkthrough. I'm going to walk you through the 5 steps on like how to get to use this, the prompt essentially to give you the output as you're writing your resume. But essentially when you get to the actual part of the core, which is the experience, which is what's most important, and which is where the companies are going to spend their most time. If your content isn't there, even if you get through the applicant tracking system, you're not going to get moved forward in the interview process. So you do have to think about the 3 audiences, and that's the ATS, recruiting, and typically hiring manager. And so this is going to help you build a resume that's going to appeal to the applicant tracking system, to recruiters, and to hiring managers by using this framework. And you want to think of it from the lens of your scope, your scale, your impact, and then the proposition, or what I like to call positioning, which is how does this align. So if you can use a prompt that will help you pull this information out, then you're going to have a resume that is going to stand out strong in a job market today where a lot of people are not taking the time to tailor their resumes in this way. And they're not using prompts that are going to get them more into an ATS-friendly format with the impact that they're looking for when it gets into the hands of somebody. So I have this prompt that I personally like to use, and feel free to take a screenshot. Again, it'll be in the community. But essentially for you, I tell people you can write like, hey, your resume writer, rewrite this bullet point to show scope, scale, impact, positioning, and it'll give you the initial bullet point that you had, but then the output is going to be different. And you'll see that this is more of what I call a SSIP approved resume. And this is how you want to think about writing your experience section. And then when we look at the actual breakdown in a second here, walking through the 5 steps, you'll see the whole prompt for the entire resume pulling in the job description. So I'll walk you through that here in just a moment. But a few of the common mistakes that I do like to call out in terms of using AI to write a resume. What ends up happening with a lot of resumes is that they tend to be too vague. So you say, make my resume better, help me revamp this resume, but you're not getting output that actually is tailored to your experience and tailored to the roles that you're targeting. That's going to be relevant. That's going to allow you to get through these applicant tracking systems. You're not using a job description. So you should be pulling in the job description and using that to help you revamp your resume. And again, if you're using job descriptions, if you're applying to similar roles, you shouldn't have to be changing a lot in your resume. It should get to the point where you are seeing that there's a theme and trend across these job descriptions, and you can use and reference. Most of the job descriptions are going to be, there's a lot of overlap. So you may just keep like a couple of examples of job descriptions and use that as you need it, or maybe you just need to change a bullet point, but it shouldn't have to be a complete revamp of your resume every single time. if you're applying to similar roles. Now, if you're applying to different types of roles where there's no overlap in the responsibilities or the skills, that's where I'm going to say you're going to want to pull in the job description every time, because that's going to maximize your chance of getting through an applicant tracking system. But the other thing is also for getting human voice. So a lot of times now, I will say that what I've heard from a lot of my friends in recruiting is that they know when a resume is written by ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, and it's not so much around them using AI to write the resume. It's more around them telling a story, like showing their impact. So it feels generic versus like showing the impact. And that's why I'm leaning into the impact part of it, because that's where also I see people miss the mark just based on what I have seen from people in my network and what I have heard and what I've also read in articles as well. And then also not editing. So if you're using AI, just make sure that you're double checking before you're actually submitting and just doing at least a skim through, because AI can also make a lot of errors too. And so sometimes ChatGPT and I fight because it gets rough out there where I'm trying to say like, hey, like, why aren't you giving me the information I need? And so you just have to pay attention to the output again that you're getting, because it doesn't always give you the right information, and you just want to make sure that it is reflective of your experience and what you can actually speak to when you go into interviews. And so I always tell people, like, think about who is it for, so what role, what industry, what you want, so metrics, clarity, and tone, and then the formatting is going to be tied to the SIP star. So kind of lazy proofing it. So I like to put it into a methodology that's as simple as possible. Step 1, so this is kind of the framework that I would say to follow as you're looking to revamp your own resumes, is you want to paste your entire resume into whatever AI tool that you're using. And then you're going to use the prompt here that I have where you're saying, hey, you're a resume writing expert. I'm applying to this target role, target industry. Rewrite my resume, and then you're going to give it this list where you want it to use the action verbs and all of these things. You will paste the job description. So I have it as the 4th bullet point there. You paste the actual job description, and then you want to make sure that includes your scope, your scale, your impact, and then you want to position it for where you're going next. So making sure you're positioning it to your target role. So if you take and follow these steps, you'll get a really strong output. You might have to tweak it a little bit and like refine it, but this is a really strong starting point if you're using this and you're trying to revamp your resume. This is how I would recommend. Step 1, you do this. Then I would say once you run it, you want to refine it. So once it gives you the initial draft, then you want to run one or more of the prompts there where you may want it to add more numbers or metrics where possible. So if you're asking to add numbers and metrics, like maybe you include some numbers and metrics from your own experience, and you jot in a couple of examples so that way ChatGPT is actually including accurate information. Make this sound more human and less like ChatGPT. So refining the tone so it does sound more human. Cut anything out that's not related. So these are just some bullets that you can use. You can play around and swap, out some of these bullet points as it makes sense. And then you want to, step 3, you want to polish it just like for the top 20%. So like you don't need to have perfection. So the edits that you should be focusing on are going to be when you think about job roles that you're applying to as you're continuing to refine it, you want to focus on the resume summary, because then that's an easy way to make edits. And then you want to focus on the first like 3 to 5 bullet points under your most recent job, because when we think about how recruiters tend to review experience, and even hiring managers, a lot of times what's most recent is most relevant to them. And so they're going to spend most of their time initially in that first role. They might go one role back, and then as it gets earlier and earlier back into your career, they're going to spend less time. So you want to really hook them in that current role that you're in, unless you're trying to pull experience from like an earlier role, then you probably want to have a separate section for that. And that's, again, in the other workshop that I talked about that a bit more. But then you can, prompt it with some of these things here. So that's going to be like step 3 is just kind of fine tuning as you're applying to roles. And then warnings. So you don't want to skip the job description. You don't want to accept the first draft as is. So you want to make sure that you are at least running it through maybe twice, maybe 3 times, and kind of asking it to refine more so around the tone, and then just like focusing on some of the impact bullet points, I think is what I typically tend to see. And then you don't want to use like the tables, columns, formats, because that's going to run through the ATS parsing, and that typically is going to potentially mess up kind of the formatting in terms of like your resume getting pulled in for review. But what you will walk away with is, when you do kind of follow these steps, is you're going to see that your resume, it should be about 80 to 90% aligned to a job. It should be skimmable, clean, it should be updated, and it should be positioning you for the next chapter, not just, as I said, have here retelling your past, because companies, what they care about, and this is the biggest thing I will tell you right now in today's job market, they care about relevancy. If you can show them that you have the experience and the skills that's relevant to them and what they're hiring for. And that's where a lot of people you just don't know what you don't know. And so you're talking about your past experience, but you need to be pulling out examples from your experience that are relevant to what they're actually asking for in these job descriptions. So that would be my big thing too, is just like paying attention to, if I read this job description and I'm looking at my resume, can a hiring manager or recruiter see that I have this experience? Do I have clear examples? Do I have the skills? Do I have the technologies? If you don't, then you need to plug it back in to ChatGPT, and you need to try and refine it, or you need to, rewrite it yourself. But that would be my recommendation there. And then my final prompt that is copy and paste ready here is like, this is just more of a catch-all. I would use the first one that I shared with you, but if you just want something really simple and you just want to say, hey, I just want something that I can just throw in one time and that's it, then you can use something like this. And then you can put the job posting and your resume below. But I personally would use the other step that I shared with you earlier on, just because it'll give you a better output. And then I just like to call this out, because sometimes people say they don't have metrics, and this for me is a big topic of discussion too. There's a lot of different ways to show metrics. So again, you can screenshot this. This is available in the community, but metrics doesn't necessarily just mean dollar amounts and percentages. It can mean things like frequency, it can mean speed, time. So if you're having a hard time of getting metrics into your resume based on the prompts that you're feeding it, think about other ways that you personally, in your experience, maybe have had to display impact in terms of other methodologies. So it could be speed, it could be frequency, it could be satisfaction scores. So what other ways have you had to quantify your impact? Because we all have metrics. So I just like to show this graph, because sometimes we don't always realize that we do have metrics, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a dollar amount or a percentage. So just like to share that there. And then a couple of the hiring trends, just to kind of wrap up, is that what we tend to see here now in 2025, a lot more employers are going to be using aptitude and personality tests to vet candidates before interview stage. And the reason why is because there's more AI being used on both sides, but because there's more AI being used, companies are now leaning more into the assessments, into the personality tests. So just expect that to be a trend and continue to be a theme. And also on the resumes, to extract the skills, accessibilities, and spot fit. So one of the things is that the skills matching, which is why I talked about it multiple times, the skills matching is really important. So you want to pay attention to that, because a lot of companies are using skills to essentially identify talent. And so you want to just make sure that you're tailoring the resume to have the appropriate skills, so you're getting pulled as part of that skills matching process. And then AI screen resumes and video interviews. So we're seeing now more companies that are doing video interviews versus you actually interviewing with a live person, or you're seeing like chats where you'll have virtual recruiters that are actually not necessarily recruiters, they're like chatbots essentially, that are actually doing scheduling, or even the interview. It's like a virtual recruiter that's like interviewing with you, but it's actually an AI interviewer. So just be on the lookout for things like that. And then the last is bias. Bias unfortunately comes up in a lot of hiring processes, and there really isn't going to be a fix around that. The hiring process at the end of the day has holes, and it's going to continue to have holes. You just have to equip yourself with the knowledge to know how to work within the holes that there are, which is bias. And unfortunately, even within AI, using AI hiring systems, we are seeing bias come up, because the people who's training the data and training these models, we are only as good as the information that's being fed to the technology. So depending on how these models are getting trained, that's where we're seeing some of this bias come up in the hiring process. But we are also seeing that compared to last year, 58% of companies, now 72% across the globe, when we think about just at a global scale of adoption, companies are adopting AI into their hiring systems. So just know that this is going to be something that is only going to continue to scale. So with all that being said, that is really all I have on my end in terms of what I wanted to share. I do hope that this was helpful to all of you. And if you have any questions, please, by all means, again, I'll say this one more time. The community is available, so I'll send out a recap email to those who attended with the ChatGPT tool that I created, along with just the information to join the community, which is free. And I do office hours weekly, and I'm going to continue hosting workshops. And in a couple weeks, actually, I'm going to have someone from HR come in and speak about his experience on the HR side. So that might be interesting for some of you to join. So that's it. Thank you. Whew. All right, only 2 minutes behind. Thank you all so much. Thank you, thank you. I hope you all have a great day. Best time to apply for jobs, Monday, Tuesday morning. Yes, Monday, Tuesday morning, but also on the weekend. If you're applying, say on like Sunday, going into Monday, that can be another good day to apply. There's a lot of actually data around high conversion on Sundays as well. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're most welcome. I hope you all have an absolute amazing day, and thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate all of you. Thank you. Bye, everyone.